Well, hello again. Welcome to Horror in Detail. Today we are going to share Wendigo and urban legend horror stories. First story. This story was shared by you/I Merciless Void. The time I saw a Wendigo. First things first, this happened to me when I was around 10. I've lived in Idaho all my life and spent a lot of time outside or in the wilderness as a kid. My grandparents would take me camping and my older brother and I would always hike up whatever trails we could find to get a view of the sunset. On one of these occasions, something terrifying happened. We were up at a campsite I only know as Warm River, the river there never freezes over, and my brother and I were on a regular evening hike. There was an old tunnel bored through the mountain at one part of the trail, probably an old train tunnel, and we were walking through it when I heard something I'll never forget. After walking through probably 2/3 of the way through the tunnel, I heard a terrible screech at the end we entered through. The screech wasn't like anything I've heard before. I've heard the screams of animals on dark and windy nights, I even think I've heard Bigfoot calls a few times, but never the metallic, grinding screech I heard that day. The point is, whatever the sound was, it did not sound natural in any capacity. I probably jumped 5 feet in the air when I heard it, and my brother shouted a few choice curses before shooing me quickly to the exit of the tunnel. At this point, my brother decided we should just continue walking and head back after whatever made the noise hopefully cleared out. We didn't have any firearms on us, so I was pretty upset. My brother reassured me we would be fine, and we made the walk back without incident. However, I didn't get any sleep that night. Whether it was the thing that screeched at us or just my imagination, I heard things moving around the campsite the whole night, as well as whispers echoing through the darkness outside the trailer. I woke my brother up a few times to check out what it was, but he refused each time, telling me that it was probably just other campers staying up late and enjoying themselves. The rest of the trip was pretty normal. We packed up the following day and my life continued as normal. I was disconcerted but chalked what happened up as a harmless event that I must have been exaggerating in retrospect. A few weeks later I went up to Pine Basin, an old ski lodge my family rented each year for family reunions. Here I would mess around with my cousins, our favorite activities being night games. We would play hide and seek, a game called Ghosts in the Graveyard, and other games like that. On one instance, I was chosen to be the seeker for a hide and seek game. Because I was one of the younger cousin, I got a flashlight as an advantage. Normally, all the younger cousins hid close to the lodge and the older cousins hid in the nearby trees or at the base of the nearby mountain. As I was searching near the bottom of the mountain, I heard a familiar whistle up the mountain a bit. We would always whistle as a hint at our locations. It sounded like someone was hiding way up near a tree known as the underwear tree, you can guess why, so I began trekking up toward the whistle. As I climbed closer, I got an uneasy feeling in my stomach. I continued on wearily, and convinced myself that I would be fine. I hated walking in the night alone, but figured whoever I find would walk me back to the lodge. As I neared the tree, I noticed that it was deathly silent. This alerted me that something was very wrong, because you could always hear the adults having fun back at the lodge. I was anxious to hurry back, so I called out, "I found you, Scott." I thought the whistle was my older cousins, "Come back down with me." I got no reply, but I wasn't planning on waiting. As I began walking back down the path, I heard a voice call, "You almost had me," so I ran back up to investigate. I flashed my light in the branches of the tree, and saw a monstrosity that was not my cousin. It looked like a poorly drawn stick figure made into a human with its emaciated figure and lifeless eyes. I remember its face looked like the skin on its head was being pulled from behind, it had torn and stretched features. As soon as I saw the creature I screamed, dropped the flashlight and ran back to the lodge. The entire time I ran I was overcome by an overpowering smell and I could hear the thing running after me. As I approached the camp I saw a few people, my cousins, at the bottom of the mountain waiting for me. I was crying and shaking and they took me inside. I told my dad what happened, but my cousins all said they didn't see anything following me. The adults kept us inside for the night, and I kept hearing sounds drifting in from the mountains. I never played night games after that happened, and was always terrified that my cousins wouldn't listen to my warnings. Ever since that night I have always felt uneasy up in those mountains. I used to be really religious and figured it was a demon of some kind trying to kill me or something like that, but those mountains have never felt the same after that incident. A few years ago the game, Until Dawn, became really popular and I watched a walkthrough of it on YouTube. When the Wendigo first appeared in game, I got chills down my spine. It was exactly what I saw, and I did a ton of research on them. I figure someone must have gotten snowed in at that old lodge and resorted to cannibalism, but that doesn't explain what happened at Warm River. I still hear that screech from time to time. It never occurred to me until watching Until Dawn that they might be from the same thing, and it scares the hell out of me every time. I heard it earlier tonight, and that's why I decided to finally write my story down. Wish me luck. Second story. This story was shared by you/salty_handle 6671. The Dead TV Ritual. This is a story that has haunted me since my childhood, an experience I went through when I was just a little boy. I grew up in a secluded small town where we didn't have many ways of entertainment, so strange stories were told like urban legends. One of those obscure legends was the so-called Dead TV Ritual. The legend claimed that during a lunar eclipse, it was possible to tune into an empty channel on the television and see the spirits of the dead. It sounded so absurd that my best friend at the time, Chris, and I decided to test it, more for fun than for any real belief in the legend. The night of the eclipse arrived, with the sky covered in dark clouds, obscuring the moon. We took an old black and white television we found stored in the basement, that had belonged to my grandfather and began adjusting the antennas, trying to find an empty channel. We fiddled with the antennas for a while until we finally managed to tune into a channel that showed nothing but static. We sat in front of the TV, staring at the blank screen, our anticipation building. At first, nothing happened, and we began to doubt the truth of the legend. The room was filled with an eerie silence, broken only by the soft hum of the television. But then, slowly, the static on the screen started to take shape, like shadows moving behind it. Our eyes were glued to the screen, hypnotized by what was happening. Gradually, images began to appear, images of distorted faces and whispering voices. They sounded like muffled screams, and their voices seemed to penetrate our souls. The faces twisted, and the voices grew more and more anguished. We felt a shiver down our spines when we realized that these faces were familiar. They were people who had died in our town, some of them still alive in our memories. Their eyes held an empty, desperate gaze, as if they were trapped between worlds. Our hearts began to race, and we had never felt more scared. It was as if we were witnessing something we shouldn't have, something that defied all the laws of reality. The images on the screen seemed to call out to us, as if they wanted us to join them in their spectral realm. Then, a face appeared on the screen that we couldn't recognize. It was a pale and cadaverous face, with empty eyes that seemed to look directly at us. It started moving towards the screen, as if it wanted to exit the TV and enter our world. At that moment, we panicked. We turned off the television abruptly, cutting the connection to those disturbing images. The static returned, and the room fell silent, but the fear still echoed in our hearts. Chris and I went on with our lives and neither one of us ever spoke about that night again, and the old television was returned to the basement, where it remained forgotten until today. Now, years later, I still have nightmares about those distorted faces and whispering voices we heard that night. I think we messed with something we shouldn't have, something way beyond our understanding. Since then, I have never attempted to tune into the dead TV, and the memory of that night continues to haunt me, as a dark reminder that some urban legends are best left as legends, untested and untouched. Third story. This story was shared by you/Chronoswept. In Inakamura, Howling Dog Pass. So, I'm a researcher, and one of my favorite subjects has been folklore and urban legends, which is part of the reason why I remember this story so vividly. Almost 10 years ago, I was friends with an American expat living in Japan. We were both members of some online community, and both had a love of horror stories. And one day, she told me the story of an Inakamura, I believe somewhere nearby Fukuoka. She explained Fukuoka was kind of a spooky place in general, but I digress. She explained an Inakamura would translate as Barking Dog Pass or Howling Dog Pass. It was a tiny little mountain town, with its only real point of access a tunnel pass that has long since collapsed. The history of collapses is hardly new, and is what gave the town its name to begin with. It collapsed so many times upon its first construction and killed a number of people. It's said that going near or in the tunnel at night, you can hear what sounds like dogs barking or howling past the collapsed tunnel. Story has it, they're not dogs, but the voices of the dead workers screaming in pain. The tunnel now is collapsed, but also very carefully walled up with massive construction blocks, apparently put there by the government. There's any number of reasons that have been cited for this, but for whatever reason, the government does not want people going into an Inakamura. My online friend, however, had ample opportunity to talk to the people she lived around, and plenty enough of them knew about the tiny mountain town. They told that it is still possible to get past the collapsed tunnel, but it definitely wasn't advisable. See, even after the tunnel off the mountain had collapsed, the town still survived, but it was a strange place. The people who lived in that town did not follow the same rules that are common in other places, and it was a lawless kind of place. The way she phrased it, especially as an American, was awkward enough for it to have substantial semantic meaning translated from the original Japanese. I'm fairly certain that the context of it being a strange lawless place, with strange rules unlike those of surrounding towns has its own cultural denotations, but I can't speak to that. Specifically, some of the rules you should follow going into the town was that you should never accept anything that people try to give you, and never believe or follow their directions. That, and don't gamble with them, which apparently was a common activity in the town, and the reasons for abstaining from gambling with them were also not elaborated upon. Oh, and don't stand or stay too long in the trees around the town. Strange, fabric-like shadows flutter around high above in the trees, and if you linger too long, they drop silently from above and envelope you. My friend didn't explain what these entities were, or what was supposed to happen after they covered you, but the lack of explanation sort of spoke volumes to me. While that's all I can remember of my friend's account, the story stuck with me for 10 years. And every once in a while, I'll go looking through Google to see if I can pull anything up about an Inakamura. About 5 years ago, I came across an entire site, in Japanese, about the town. I still didn't know Japanese, so I relied on my old friend Google Translate to do most of the heavy lifting. The translation tool was still pretty clumsy back then, but the site held some interesting information that offered some new stories and corroborated with the ones I heard from my friend. The town was indeed a little mountain town. It did have a collapsed, walled-off tunnel. When the creator of the site went to visit it to begin with, they found a load of mannequins bizarrely dumped at the mouth of the tunnel. They explained people would often bring up and leave weird stuff all around the entrance, for no clear reason. But this person had gotten inside the town, and reported it as abandoned and empty. The pictures they had taken showed a number of traditional-looking structures, most of them almost completely submerged in brackish water. This was explained that the town was both prone to flooding, but the government had also dammed up a water flow, causing it to back up into the town. After this was realized, the government evacuated the people, but then never allowed them to go back or try to fix the town. The creator of the site did mention that there were still things in the water, and that you shouldn't get too close for fear of being pulled in. Oh, and the sound of barking dogs. They did mention that being anywhere near the tunnel, and you would hear barking dogs. They also added that you shouldn't stay near the tunnel for too long, because the men who had died in the tunnel were still there, and would come for you. That's really all that I can remember about Inakamura. I'd welcome anyone to share if they have anything else to add. Fourth story. This story was shared by you/Atlantic_mapping. The Skin Stealer. I live in a very small town in Idaho. In my town, there is this urban legend of a skin stealer, a creepy dark figure that eats people, and wears their skin in order to claim more victims. I always thought it was complete bullshit. However, there have been a lot of bodies found, blood everywhere, flesh with bite marks in it, skulls crushed, and their skin nowhere to be found. I always thought this was some sick, demented, serial killer. Until one night. I own 6 chickens, Nugget, Drumstick, Henanglita, Peep, Little Jerry, and Beaker. We love them and they keep our egg supply full. One day, I noticed we weren't getting as many eggs as we used to. I asked my dad about it, who was standing right next to me. "Hey Dad," I asked, "ever notice we aren't getting as many eggs as we used to from the hens?" Dad looked at me. "Well, they are getting to that age. I had recently read about chickens when one of them got sick. They're only a year old. They usually slow down near 18 months. Well, if they aren't slowing down egg production, what do you think?" Dad exclaimed sternly. "Maybe some fox." Well, I guess not a fox. A rat could fit through the chicken wire. I thought aloud. Dad was puzzled. "Go get some security cams. We'll put them in the chicken coop overnight." The spy cameras cost me a lot of money, and I wasn't happy with Dad extorting me like that, but I also wanted to see what happened to their eggs. I set them up. Unfortunately, the chickens got out and I had to round them in. After I was finished rounding them up, I went to sleep. I woke up, drowsy, tired, and I had a cold. I didn't remember the spy cameras until breakfast. I checked the footage, and I found. Still shakes me to the core to this day. Around the witching hour, a creature, fitting the exact description of the skin stealer, came into the chicken coop by. I don't know, it just walked right through the chicken wire. The creature was completely black, except for its face. Oh God, its face, it was the most haunting, fucking smile, a twisted expression. I saw nothing genuinely happy in its eyes. I saw nothing in its eyes. They were completely white. Its mouth, which was completely white as well, was filled with crooked black teeth. It moved extremely fast. When it got to the henhouse, it reached slowly in and grabbed the eggs in the coop. I showed the video to everyone, family, friends, and everyone else in the town. Now, there were no more skeptics. Everyone believed in the skin stealer. I was shocked for a month after that. I lost sleep. I was anxious around every corner. I thought the skin stealer would attack me after proving he was real. After a year, the skin stealer was in the back of my mind, and I wanted to do something completely unrelated. I found an old abandoned house when I was walking with my friend. There was old, creepy, brick, everything you'd find in a haunted house. We should totally explore there, I suggested. My friend was shocked. Nope, no way, he said. If you don't, I'll do the chicken thing. I teased, buck 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 dash. Fine, fine, my friend was annoyed. But if we die there, it's your fault. Yeah, right. I denied. I thought that'd never happen. The door was locked, so we had to break a window open with a rock. When we climbed inside, the air was moist and musty, it also smelled like a corpse. Which did not calm my friend's nerves. We need to get out of here, my friend shouted. Ah, come on. While he wasn't looking, I took a rock from the old floor and dropped it down to the basement. What was that? My friend screamed. Then, we stopped, we heard scurrying from upstairs, we both agreed we needed to leave immediately. We went back to the window and found ourselves face to face with the skin stealer. We were too scared to move. Yes. Food. Meat. The skin stealer talked in monosyllabic words and in slurred speech. Please. My friend screamed, please don't eat us. Please. Too bad. The skin stealer pounced on both of us. It plunged its claw into my chest. With the adrenaline I had, I managed to wriggle out from under the skin stealer, and could only watch in horror as the creature skinned my friend alive. I smashed a window with a rock, and I ran away. I was half a mile down the road when my friend caught up with me. I was confused, I thought he died. Holy shit. What just happened? I exclaimed, relieved that my friend was okay. I don't know. My friend droned. Then I realized his eyes were completely black. I realized that skin stealer was wearing my friend's skin. How do I know this is you? Grr. The creature growled, and then, horrifically, crawled out my friend's mouth. You idiot. Idiot. The creature lunged at me. I took a bat I had been carrying. I took one swing, and it got knocked backward. I then beat it to death with the bat. I still have to go to therapy for the PTSD I had from this whole situation. We more eggs now, but I still blame myself for my friend's death. If I hadn't been such a jerk, that wouldn't have happened. The worst part is, the skin stealer is still out there, as there have been many reports of murders in the next town over. This creature is ruining my life, and it ended my friend's. Fifth story. This story was shared by you/Rick_the_intern. If you see this man on the side of the road, don't drive home. We have this urban legend in my city called the Wrong Way Man. Supposedly, you might see him standing on the side of the road when you're driving. Some say it's always when you're on your way home. I've seen pictures of the Wrong Way Man. They circulate among us by text message. They circulate among students, workers, friends, and family here. Oddly, I've never seen any of those pictures posted online. I'm not sure if it's because of fear, because those who've taken the pictures want to perpetuate the mystique of our local urban legend, or because of something else. I was pretty sure those pictures had been a hoax, just someone dressed up as the Wrong Way Man. Maybe it was the same person every time. As far as what the Wrong Way Man looks like, he wears his tattered clothing backwards, usually a flannel shirt and jeans. His painted smiling face looks eerily realistic, until he turns to the side and you can see it's a smooth surface. It seems that he shaves his hair off, paints a face over the back of his head, and puts a shoulder-length wig on that covers up his real face. Those who I've met who claim to have spotted the Wrong Way Man say they waited a week before driving home, staying over at a friend's house or a hotel and not even bothering to go home to pack a suitcase. I've also heard, though, that you need to wait a month. The common consensus seems to be, if you see him while driving home, don't finish the drive home. Turn around, go somewhere else, and wait for at least a week. I thought it was a bunch of nonsense, until my date and I saw the wrong way man when we were going back to my house from the movies. It was Katie who spotted him. "Slow down," she said. "I think I see that wrong way man you told me about." Katie had only lived in my city for half a year, so one of the things I had told her on my quest to share with her as many interesting things as I could had been our local urban legend about the wrong way man. Was it a coincidence that we'd just been talking about him a few days before? I had never seen someone dressed as the wrong way man in person. Pictures, sure. But never in person. My foot was shaking as I eased up on the gas. It was dark, nearing midnight dark, and there were either no streetlights or they were off. My car's headlights lit him up. On the side of the road, he was facing us. Actually, he had his back to us. That painted face was facing us. The jeans and flannel shirt and wig were all turned our way as well. His arms and legs looked wrong. They were shoved down in his clothing the opposite way. I wanted to be amused, but I was alarmed. When we got to be about 10 feet away in my car, he turned his painted head towards us. Those painted eyes, realistic but forever held too wide, seemed to be staring right into mine. As we drove slowly by, I waved to him and laughed to try to ease some of the tension. He did not wave back. I looked at Katie. She was waving too. But she wasn't laughing. I glanced back in time to see the slick side of that person's shaved, painted head, and the optical illusion of a real face being there was shattered. Shattered, but somehow worse for it. Also, when I peered into the rearview mirror as we increased our distance, I thought I saw something glinting beneath the shoulder-length wig he wore. Then he was gone. Lost to the darkness. I picked up speed. He hadn't been walking, but somehow I was worried he would come after us too quickly. "So what do we do now?" Katie said. "We can't go to your home, or mine." I glanced at her, and soon we both started laughing. "Well," I said, "after tonight we'll be able to tell everyone around that we saw the wrong way man and went immediately home. I wonder who was pretending to be the wrong way man." Katie said. "I wonder why they were doing it. Do you think we should turn back around and try to talk to them?" "I'd rather we didn't," I said. "They could be dangerous. But I'm sure it's just someone looking to keep the urban legend alive." "It's your car," Katie said. "But if it was mine?" "All right," I said. "We'll turn back around. My grandpa used to say, if you're in doubt which turn to make, you can always take a U-turn until you figure things out." He used that as a metaphor for life. But as I did my U-turn, my heart was thrashing in my chest. We drove down the entirety of that dark street without seeing that person again. It was a couple of miles long in that direction, so there's no way they could have walked or run the distance so quickly. Katie and I decided that the person dressed as the wrong way man must have left the shoulder of the road for the surrounding woods. The idea of them hiding in the woods as we drove by again made me feel like I had spiders crawling over my flesh. We did another U-turn, and during that whole time I kept glancing around in case that person jumped at us from out of nowhere. But soon we were heading back in the direction of my house with no second look at the wrong way man. Katie and I tried to laugh it out, and we tried talking about other things, but both of us were pretty scared. We couldn't stop chatting about everything and nothing or glancing out the windows or into our side mirrors. We turned into my subdivision. Then we turned onto my street. And everything changed. As soon as we turned onto my street, we started to go backwards instead of forwards. "Did you put it in reverse?" Katie said. Her hand was gripping my arm. It was as cold as ice. I stopped the car. Both of us were looking down. The car was in drive. I took my foot off of the brake and put it onto the gas pedal again. The houses, familiar houses I saw every day when coming home, were moving away from us. Maybe something's wrong with my car, I said. But when I tried driving forward again, I looked to the side and then in the rearview mirror. We were not moving. Not according to those views. In front of us, the houses receded every time I put my foot on the gas, but from the side and rear it appeared that we were standing still. On my street, everything was well lit. There were tons of streetlights. So we couldn't argue it away as if it had anything to do with limited visibility. "Let's get out of here," Katie said. Her voice was almost a whisper. "Yeah," I said, in a similar way. "But how are we going to leave?" "Put it in reverse." When I put my car in reverse and tried that, we actually moved forward. But to the side and rear, once again we seemed to have not moved, like we were caught just past the entrance to my neighborhood. It was when Katie and I had stopped the car and were debating getting out that we spotted someone coming towards us on the sidewalk. They were approaching us from the front of the vehicle, so I'm not sure how accurate the distance was. It seemed like they were already about 20 feet away. I don't know why it took me so long to realize this. Maybe it was because I didn't want to, but I recognized my neighbor by the back of his head and by his body shape, which was somewhat atypical. I'd seen him often stooped working in his garden while I was driving by. He was walking backwards towards us. When he got closer, he stopped. Then he began shouting, "Emplea! Emplea," over and over again. Standing stock still. His back to us. Only later would I realize he had been saying, "Help me," in reverse. I rolled down the window. "Mr. Nelson," I said. "What's the matter?" He stopped shouting. Now that my window was down, I could hear his body creak and snap. Blood poured out of fissures as the joints of his arms and legs changed drastically. When Mr. Nelson's head twisted all the way around towards us, I was sure that I saw the light go out of his eyes. Then, whatever had taken over Mr. Nelson made a first step forward with the new architecture of his body. Katie and I both began to scream at that first step. I rolled up the window as Mr. Nelson loped around on strange, inhuman legs. His kneecaps and elbows had become stretched and exaggerated from being reversed. I put my foot on the gas, with the car still in reverse, and through the front windows we seemed to be careening forward. Even though a glance out the sides or in the rear view showed us to still be stationary, we slammed into Mr. Nelson. Blood slashed across the windshield. The car rose and fell as we went over his body. To the sides and rear, there was no indication of the car rising and falling. I did not see a lump appear behind us. I kept my foot on the gas, still going forward in reverse. I saw a window of a neighbor's house shatter. A couple I barely recognized crawled out like baby spiders out of eggs, leaking blood and more blood as they scraped themselves against the shards in the window frame. I don't think it was that they didn't know how to open windows. When the wife paused in the window, she smiled. She intentionally rubbed her scalp against a particularly sharp-looking piece of glass. Meat and blood came away. I think I could see the white of her skull. By then her husband was already on the ground running towards us. I sped forward. They and their house vanished in the sides and rear of the vehicle, which were, again, still stuck near the street's entrance. More people were coming out of their homes. They came out all twisted and broken, damaging themselves further as they exited. They ran towards us on backwards legs, churning their backwards arms. Everything about them was the wrong way. Before long, I found myself slamming on the brakes. "Keep going," Katie yelled. "They're going to catch up with us." Ahead, I saw my own driveway. Someone that looked like me was talking to another person with a painted face. The painted face nodded. Up and down it nodded like a real face would do. Then, when I saw the wig shuffle and move seemingly on its own, I realized that the true face under that wig was talking. Moving its lips. Breathing. The wrong way man was talking to me or someone who looked like me. At the same time, Katie was reaching over me, trying desperately to put her foot on the gas. A couple of twisted pieces of bone and meat collided with the windshield. Two faces with bunched up folds of neck leered at me out of glazed eyes. These were faces I should have recognized. Their twisted arms continued to beat at the window even though their eyes told me that no one was home. A spider's web of cracks spread across the windshield. Its grooves caught blood. I slammed my foot on the gas while helping to steady Katie back into her seat. We flung those two off, and right after we ran over an entire family in quick succession. I didn't have time to feel guilty. These were not my neighbors. These were not my neighbors. These were not. Katie and I both began to change. I heard some of my bones break. I felt it a moment later. Like the reverse of lightning before thunder. Katie and I started screaming, almost in unison and about in the same tune. It was like a choir of pain and fear and pain had risen up with us as instruments. Keep your head back. I yelled as I strove to keep my head pinned against my seat. Don't let it twist around. No matter what happens to the rest of our bodies, we can't let it kill us. I know. Katie said. Just get this car out of here. Make a U-turn or something. Make a U-turn, I thought. What was it my grandpa said about life and how if you didn't know what to do, you could always make a U-turn? Still in reverse, yet still going forward, I wheeled the car screeching around. I didn't glance out the sides or rear. I gunned it, heading back towards where we had come from. The wrong way man waited. He waited for me at the juncture of my driveway and the street. His painted mouth grinned forever. His painted eyes were too wide and incapable of blinking. We passed him and drove out of the neighborhood. Katie and I weren't out of the woods, though. I was able to get us to a nearby gas station before my legs and arms, which were partway reversed and leaking blood, completely gave out. We crawled out of the vehicle and onto the cold, hard concrete of the gas station. I blacked out almost at once, but Katie tells me she retained consciousness until the ambulance arrived. I don't envy her. We spent months in the hospital with broken bones and torn ligaments and muscle. I think the only thing that had saved us permanent damage might have been the seats of our vehicle resisting our changes. We told the doctors we had been in a car accident. They shook their heads at us and kept asking questions. I did go back home, eventually. We both did. The reason I went home was because one of my neighbors that we had run over with my car came to the hospital to visit me. They seemed completely fine, as if nothing had happened and the wrong way man had never changed them. But damage was done to my vehicle and to Katie and me, both physically and psychologically, and while our bodies are on the mend, I don't think we'll ever be the same. I feel the wrong way inside. Sixth story. This story was shared by you/multiverse_Shane. The Woodland Trickster. What the hell is it with people and following urban legends? Or just legends in general? Kids trying to summon Bloody Mary, looking for monsters, or hell, even playing with a Ouija board. Like I'm sorry, but do you want to die? I get that most of these are made up, but you never know if there's some underlying truth to it all. I learned the hard way not to fuck with urban legends. And it wasn't even by choice. Let me explain. There's a Navajo legend, or so they call it, that is often told in our town. The story goes that a man-like creature patrols the woods nearby. The man wears a coyote skull over his head as well as a furred cloak and cape. He's known as the woodland trickster. The woodland trickster does almost exactly what the name entails. He tricks hunters, adventurers, or anyone that passes by the woods. If anyone tries to pull their own sorts of trickery, the trickster will attack. At least, that's how the story goes. And one day, I witnessed the horror of the trickster in action. It all started a small innocent prank. Our town celebrates the woodland trickster as a weird holiday. So for my art class at school, we were assigned to come up with our own concept art for the woodland trickster, based on other stories and artworks. I couldn't really explain why, but the trickster creeped me out. Something about a man that wasn't actually a man just hiking around the woods to cause mischief was almost bone-chilling to me. I never liked going out into the woods, too many scary stories by the campfire I guess. One of my classmates and local bully Brian, noticed my fear as our art teacher Mr. Anthony was showing us pictures and documentary-made videos on the legend of the trickster. He pointed at me and cackled out loud. "Guys, look at Shane, he's about to piss himself." The asshole called out. The fact that this shit was still going on while Brian and I were 18 was usually enough to piss me off. But the current video the teacher was showing was enough to keep me scared. It was a video of a group of actors, showing how to summon the woodland trickster. Alts hashka, alts hashka, alts hashka. The people on the video chanted. I was so scared I didn't even notice that Brian had left his seat. Right around the same time the woodland trickster popped up in the video, someone with a bull skull mask jumped out from behind me shouting something, causing me to scream and fall out of my seat. The other kids laughed as Mr. Anthony turned the lights on. As my eyes focused I saw that it was Brian holding a decorative bull skull to his face, laughing like a drunken idiot. "That's enough, Brian," Mr. Anthony yelled. Brian and some other kids were still laughing as Brian went back to his seat. Mr. Anthony helped me up. This isn't just some stupid fairy tale. This legend is a deep part of our town's history, and you would be wise to heed the warnings of our ancestors past. I had no idea what he was going on about. But I just figured she was still in his teacher facade or something like that. Later on that night I was working on my drawing for the trickster assignment. I drew the trickster as he normally is described but decided to keep the coyote's ears on the skull. Right when I was putting on some finishing details I heard a loud bang on a nearby window. I jumped and looked up, wondering what the hell would be knocking on my window this late at night. My parents weren't home and I was on the second floor, so I knew it wasn't them. I grabbed my emergency softball bat and ran downstairs, heading to the front door and keeping my eyes on the back door. I watched too many horror movies and read too many stories to know that my actions may have already fucked me over, but I didn't care. If I was about to be killed by some sick fuck, I wasn't gonna go down without a fight. I heard a knock on the door and opened it, stepping back and hitting whoever was out there. I heard metal hitting skin and possibly breaking bones as I heard a crack behind a thwack, and an echoing ting of metal. That's when I saw Brian. His nose was bleeding and he was holding it with a growl. I guess I must have broken his nose. But it's not like he didn't deserve it. "What the hell are you doing out here?" I yelled out, pissed off and frustrated. Of course this asshole wanted to come to my house tonight to scare me. "You broke my fucking nose," he whined. I rolled my eyes and started to say something, but before I could, I felt something hit me on the back of my head and I fell to the ground in pain. "Ow, what the fuck?" I cried out. Brian took my bat. "You idiot. I told you to knock him out. Damn wuss, this is how you do it." He said to someone I didn't even get a chance to see before I was hit again and everything went black. When I woke up I saw that I was in the middle of the woods. I looked around and saw that I was restrained to a tree. Damn it! What the hell was Brian up to? I was too pissed to be scared, but that didn't last long. When I was about to scream out my frustrations, I saw 3 people wearing fur skins and different animal skulls. They all surrounded me and started saying a familiar chant. Alts-hashka, Alts-hashka. They started softly. A shiver ran down my spine. Was I about to be served as a sacrifice or some shit to the woodland trickster? How did these guys find me? Did Brian and his goons somehow find a woodland trickster worship cult and decided to give me to them? See, come on guys, you don't gotta do this. I don't know how Brian bribed you to do this to me, but I'm just a kid. I begged, trying to reason with them. They continued to chant, with each iteration getting louder and louder. Alts-hashka, Alts-hashka, Alts-hashka. One of them began to sing something in the background, while the other started something that I can only describe as a prayer. Woodland trickster, hear us now, let our call bring you down. Accept our gift and give us praise, for we only want to serve your grace. They said, chant still going on in the background. I tried something, anything to get them to stop. But I couldn't hear myself think. The ceremonial chant was so loud that all I could do was close my eyes and pray to whatever or whoever was listening that I would survive. I was shaking, knowing full well that if the legend was true, I would be dead within a matter of minutes, maybe even seconds. Suddenly, the chanting had stopped, replaced with laughter. I opened my eyes to see that the 3 cultists had removed their masks and were laughing at me. I recognized these guys and knew that they were not cultists. It was Brian, Evan, and Trey. One of Brian's friends wasn't here. Lucas. Oh Shane. You should have seen the look on your face. Brian teased with an annoying laugh. Yeah man, you look like such scaredy cat up there. Come on man, do you even have a backbone? Trey bellowed. Evan snorted. You and Lucas should be friends, Guy was too scared to come out and help us. He said. I tried my hardest to pull and break free from the ropes. I swear to God Brian. This isn't funny. It's not safe out in the woods in the middle of the night. There could be coyotes or bears or dash. I stopped talking and froze. Brian was too arrogant to notice that a figure that looked exactly like the woodland trickster was approaching us slowly. Coyote skull covering and hiding their face with a black fabric underneath, fur surrounding his body as clothing. The fur was different colors, almost similar to shades of a coyote. The figure stood and watched. Or what? Brian asked with a smirk. Are you afraid the trickster is actually gonna show up? Brian's friends must have seen the trickster because they didn't say anything. Brian kept rambling on his high horse, until the trickster covered his mouth with a furred gloved hand. Claws stood out where the fingernails would be. Brian's eyes widened, but he didn't have time to react. The trickster said nothing as he snapped Brian's neck and silenced him for good. Trey and Evan tried running away, but the trickster had caught one, digging his claws into his torso before going for the other one. Blood splattered through the fresh wounds and dripped down the faux fur garments as the boys' bodies dropped to the ground. The trickster then began to claw and dig into their bodies, growling like a vicious predator that was feeding on its prey. I just sat there, frozen and helpless as I watched. I didn't want to piss off the trickster. When the man was done, he turned towards me. He then walked as close as possible to me without touching me, and I closed my eyes out of fear. I could somehow feel his breath on my face through his mask. When I opened my eyes, I saw something I wasn't expecting. Through the small holes is the man. I could see that under the mask was a human face. I thought the trickster was gonna kill me in an instant, but instead, he used his claws to cut through the ropes, setting me free. Duda juda dil bii chiz, he spoke in a deep soft voice before picking up the bodies and leaving the area of the woods we were in. As soon as I thought the coast was clear, I ran home. It took me a minute to find the path back to town, but when I did, I didn't stop. I didn't even bother calling the police. I knew they wouldn't believe me. As soon as I got home, I locked all the doors and went to my room. I laid on my bed and panted, catching my breath. If it wasn't for the fact that I needed to pass my art class to graduate, I would have thrown my drawing of the woodland trickster away. I took my phone and tried Googling what the man had said to me. It roughly translates to "no kind blood in wood." I surprisingly fell asleep that night. It must have been from all the exhaustion. I had school the following morning. With our morning announcements on the TV, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Brian Hove, Evan Paulson, and Trey Solidan have gone missing. They were last seen carrying someone into the woods with a few backpacks. If you have any information, please contact the following number. Wendy, our announcement girl, said. As I was listening, I looked over and saw Lucas. He was sweating bullets and looked nervous. I remembered what Evan said about him last night. After class, I followed him to the bathroom. "Hey Lucas," I said calmly, not wanting to spook him. The guy must have been on edge because he still jumped, leaning against the wall by the sinks. Shane. "Look, please don't tell anyone what happened. I promise I had nothing to do with it. It was all Brian's idea," Lucas pleaded. I sighed. "I'm not trying to get you in trouble, I just want to know what you know," I told him calmly. He relaxed, only slightly. After the whole prank in art class on Friday, Brian wanted to go even further. He said it was gonna be an amazing video and was gonna make us famous. I tried telling him that it was a dangerous and stupid idea, but you know how Brian is. I raised a brow, slightly confused but also intrigued. "Wait, I'm sorry, Brian wanted to turn it into a video?" I didn't see a phone or anything. Lucas started to panic again. "You mean you didn't find the hidden camera?" "Oh shit. If the cops find that video, we're so fucked. We're witnesses, man," he whined. I covered his mouth. "Would you shut the fuck up for 5 minutes?" I tried shushing him, helping him calm down. "Look, even if the cops find the video, we'll be fine. We didn't do anything to Brian or the others. It'll be fine." Lucas didn't talk to me for the rest of the day. When I got home, I decided to write this all out, wanting to get it off my chest since I couldn't tell anyone. My mom knocked on my door mid-writing. "Honey, there's something on the news about your school, something about the missing boys," she said. "Oh no. Wait, don't panic, this doesn't mean that the cops found the video." "Oh, thanks for letting me know, Mom, I'll come watch," I said, not wanting to look guilty or anything. I left my room and sat on the couch, looking up at the TV. We have reports that police have found a video camera that has footage of what we believe to be the final moments of the missing students. Viewer discretion is advised, the anchorman said, causing me to nervously bounce my knee. The video began playing and both of my parents looked at me and then back at the TV but didn't say anything. The video played back exactly as I remembered it. The chanting, me begging for my life, the whole murders, and then finally me escaping. I was expecting the video to end there, but it kept going. A few minutes after I left, the woodland trickster walked back where he stood when he killed my classmates. Stupid kids. he mumbled before taking off the mask. When I saw who was under the mask, a chill ran down my spine and I almost threw up. The woodland trickster, the man who had killed my high school bully and let me go, was my art teacher. Mr. Anthony. 7th story. This story was shared by you/b's Ghost Stories. I grew up around ghosts in the Caribbean PT1. Every so often I read about ghost stories from other cultures, stories from Filipinos and Native Americans, and one thing that I've always found interesting is how similar some of the ghosts are to ours in the Caribbean. Our countries teem with magic. There must be something about the damp decay of forests and jungles, and a turbulent history, that draws spirits of the same kind to these sorts of places. I grew up in Belize, where we inherited violent and malevolent spirits from the Mayans and from West Africa. If they were ever kind or pacified I don't know, but I do know that once the Mayans were pushed away or slaughtered by the early British colonies, and African spirits were torn from their homelands by an ocean, they have been seething with rage in the jungle ever since. Most of our myths about these creatures are really instructions on how to deal with them and get out alive, if we're ever unlucky enough to be near one. Duppy. A duppy is a type of evil spirit that has a rich folklore in Jamaica and other Caribbean islands, but not so much in Belize. There are many different variants of duppy encounters, but the ones that I'm mostly familiar have to do with spirits of dead relatives, but usually, seeing a duppy is a bad omen. The dead either have a score to settle, or they are costumes being worn by evil spirits to torment the living, and some form of obeah is usually required to keep yourself unharmed. The indigenous duppy stories are tragic. They are usually children of slaves who lived deep in the Jamaican jungles, staying well away from everyone, their baying echoing off trees in a disorienting chorus. When I was younger a Jamaican family moved to my neighborhood, and my parents quickly befriended them. One night they came over to hang out, and eventually the conversation turned to common myths and urban legends. They told us about duppy folklore. Obeah practitioners would be able to summon a duppy by using a possession of the dead person, or even their grave dirt. The doppelganger would appear to do their bidding, and to do harm to their enemies. Other stories mention slitting a goat's throat, offering its blood up to the deceased person, and then anointing those who want to interact with the duppy by placing a smudge of blood on their foreheads. A duppy can also appear in broad daylight. One of them told us how he was walking down a street in Kingston, when someone tapped his shoulder. He turned to see himself, leaning in to give him a bear hug. He shouted in terror and fell, and when he looked up, the duppy was gone. Pure mischief, he called it, laughing. He thinks a jealous coworker paid an obeah practitioner to give him a bad scare. It turns out that duppies are also perfectly capable of following Jamaicans to other countries. I don't think they were too happy about that development. One night my mom got a frantic call from her friend. Apparently she was driving home from work alone, and as she drove over a bridge on her route, she happened to look in the rearview mirror. Her late uncle was sitting in the back seat, staring at her. She said she nearly swerved off the road, but she forced herself not to scream or to look at the duppy. It might interpret any sort of interaction as an invitation. During her tense drive back, the duppy started to laugh, not a mean laugh, but a gentle one, she said, as if it was enjoying a private joke. The laughing continued for 5 minutes uninterrupted, and then abruptly stopped. My mom's friend eventually arrived home, and then forced herself to look in the mirror. The duppy was gone. In retrospect, my mom's friend said, the laughter was helpful. If the duppy was silent, she was sure she would have looked too early. 2. Tata Duende. In his youth my late grandfather was a strapping seasonal worker for sugar cane plantations. Years of punishing labor had long since taken their toll, and as a boy I knew him as a tiny, withered old man, but with a gaze of steel, a mind as sharp as ever. I remember one night my extended family descended on my grandparents' house to visit for some holiday or the other, and it started to storm. Eventually there was a blackout, as usual for Belize. My grandmother began lighting oil lamps and candles all around the house, and my grandfather decided that was the perfect time to gather me and my cousins around for some ghost stories. One of the stories he told us was about the time he and his friends signed on to a multi-day contract to complete harvesting on one of the largest plantations at the time, in a remote part of the country. They would spend large parts of the day methodically chopping the sugary stalks with their machetes, looping together huge bundles to place on a rusting old truck for delivery. One of his friends brought along his dog, a form of protection, he said. Nobody needed to ask protection from what? Do you know how dark Belizean nights got in those days? My grandfather asked us. When there were no clouds, stars would dot the sky like glitter. But when the night was cloudy, it was really pitch black out in the wilderness. Someone could walk a few feet away from you and vanish. It was an inky void, but at the same time a cacophony, of bugs shrieking and the growls of a million beasts. The scariest, my granddad said, were the alien growls of the howler monkeys. Out of nowhere he gave a startlingly loud imitation of the sound, making several of us jump and draw closer to him, to the safety of the yellow oil lamps. One night they were camping within the fields, when the cacophony stopped. My grandfather sat bolt upright within his tent, saying nothing. He told us that he knew his friends were awake as well, listening. Eventually he heard, at the very edge of his hearing, an aimless whistling, and he started to panic. In Belizean folklore there is a small spirit in the form of an ugly old man, called Tada Duende. He roamed the deepest jungles and ruins since before Belize existed. His feet were reversed, resulting in confusing tracks, and he had 4 fingers on each hand. The tales went that if you were to ever encounter him in the jungle, you must quickly fold and hide your thumbs, or he will grow enraged and bite them off. Tada Duende was more patient with little children, but he would gleefully lead them deep into the jungle where they would never be found. But probably the most bizarre fact about the Duende is that he would sometimes whistle as he approached you, and if the whistling sounded loud, that meant he was far away, but if it was almost a whisper, he was right next to you. His friend's dog exploded into barking, running out of their tent and escaping into the night. My grandfather did not have to remind his friend not to chase after the dog. No one moved, no one breathed. The dog's barking stopped, and the soft whistling continued, the aimless ditty giving way to a more jaunty tune. Amusement. After an eternity, the whistling stopped. My grandfather said they remained like that, not making a sound, for hours. At some point he fell asleep. He woke up to the blaze of daylight, and stepped out to find his friends encircling a lump on the ground. My grandfather didn't offer details, no matter how much we asked. The lights abruptly came on, heralding our re-entry into a reality that was more stably anchored. Story time was done for the night, but none of us would be getting any sleep. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comment section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.